Ministers, eminences, guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege to be back in Ukraine, this country of heroes, Kraina Heroyo, to participate in this important conference on Russia's systematic destruction and pillaging of Ukraine's rich cultural patrimony. A special thank you is due to Ukraine's distinguished Prosecutor General, Andriy Kostin, for inviting me to participate today. For me personally, having retired just last month after launching and heading at U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland's direction, the United States Justice Department's War Crimes Accountability Team for Ukraine, it's especially moving and gratifying to be reunited here in the magnificent, forever capital of free and independent Ukraine, with colleagues from the Office of the Prosecutor General, with whom we worked so closely in pursuing justice in the wake of Vladimir Putin's aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Working under the visionary and tireless leadership of Prosecutor General Kostin, these men and women are true champions and heroes of justice. At great personal risk, they are doing something that no other government in world history has ever even attempted: pursuing comprehensive justice for the victims of international crimes while their country is defending itself in a full-scale existential war. The relationship between the Prosecutor General's Office and the U.S. Department of Justice in this work is by far the closest one that I have seen and experienced in my nearly 40-year career investigating and prosecuting human rights and humanitarian rights cases. The full results of that cooperation, which began at the top with a very close relationship that has been built between Attorney General Garland and Prosecutor General Kostin, will continue to unfold. But one especially notable result was made public in December when the Justice Department charged 4 Russia-affiliated military personnel with committing war crimes against an American citizen who was residing in Ukraine. That was made possible in significant part by help that we got from the Prosecutor General's Office, and I will immodestly say on behalf of my colleagues, it made the United States the first country in the world other than Ukraine itself to prosecute Russian war criminals. An important part of the cooperative work with Ukraine on the on these issues is our cooperative work on matters involving looted and destroyed cultural properties. On the U.S. side, the principal work is done by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and my former office at the Department of Justice, the Human Rights and Special Prosecutions Section in the Criminal Division. U.S. President Joe Biden has declared that Russia's mass abduction of Ukrainian children, a ghastly crime for which Vladimir Putin is formally, thanks to the work of the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC under Karim Khan's leadership, he is formally an accused war criminal, is intended to rob Ukraine of its future. As Andriy reminded us this morning, Russia's plundering and destruction of Ukrainian cultural property is intended almost in mirror image fashion to rob Ukraine of its past and to deprive Ukrainians of their independent identity. Although Russia has launched this full-scale war that it cannot possibly win militarily, its military assault continues to this moment, exacting a terrible toll on the lives of Ukraine's brave soldiers and civilians, and on Ukraine's infrastructure and on the country's cultural heritage. This fact means that all efforts to pursue accountability, restitution, and deterrence are especially urgent. Frankly, the history of world efforts to recover objects looted during war does not inspire confidence. Many works of art looted by Nazi Germany during World War II entered international commerce and remain unrestituted, some in gallery and museum collections in various countries. Some works looted by the Nazis were subsequently taken by victorious Soviet forces and withheld by Kremlin authorities from their rightful owners, some of whom were Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. And then we could, of course, speak of the countless works taken by Napoleon's forces that have never been restituted. In my own work at the U.S. Department of Justice, we identified in the 1990s a very valuable Nazi-looted painting in the U.S. government's own possession in the holdings of the National Gallery of Art in our capital city. It took a very long time to achieve restitution of that work to the family in France from which it had been taken. In what should have been a pretty simple case, it was just intra-U.S. government discussions that should have been necessary. And we finally succeeded in the year 2000. But the fact that even that effort was so complicated gives one the beginning of a sense of how difficult these restitution efforts can be. Fortunately, Ukrainian authorities and their international governmental and civil society partners have learned some key lessons from this sad history. I think of two in particular. First, don't wait until the war has ended to begin identifying, cataloging, and fully researching cultural losses. And second, international cooperation is absolutely essential. I would say, hence, the perfect title for this conference, United for Justice, United for Heritage. We are indeed united. We are fortunate indeed to be joined on this panel by 6 leaders. There's Clint. Hey, my friend. 6 leaders in these accountability efforts, men and women who have acted boldly on the imperative to move swiftly in order to achieve maximum reparation, restitution, and let us dare hope, some deterrence as well. They come from national governments, from an esteemed multinational component of the United Nations, and from civil society. Our panel will explore next steps for advocacy and accountability. Let us begin with our host, a man who, as is often said, hardly needs any introduction. Our host, my friend Andriy Kostin, the internationally renowned Prosecutor General of Ukraine, who was appointed to that crucial position by President Zelensky in 2022, following his distinguished careers in private law practice and as a member of Ukraine's parliament. Mr. Attorney General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Eli, and once again wanted to say that I'm delighted to meet you in person in Kiev, and of course your dedication to the work of War Crimes Accountability Team on the Department of Justice and the unique result of first charges to Russian war perpetrators. They are always in history of our fight for justice and of Ukrainian fight for justice. Today, this very important step was officially followed by our colleagues from Lithuania. Our Prosecutor General of Lithuania, Nida, today announced about 3 suspects in war crimes committed against Lithuanian citizens, civilian, who was tortured and then killed in the city of Mariupol. And this is the second actual example how investigation in modern situation with use of extensive cooperation and use of all available elements of evidence could lead to the suspicion or charge, even for the cases where we have no physical access to the site, where we have no physical access to the territory, which is still under occupation. And these cases, of course, are the great example of not only assistance and solidarity in words, but a real solidarity by actions. So if our partners who help us to win on the battlefield supply us with necessary ammunition, then our partners in legal field are supplying us and Ukrainian nation with charges and suspicions from their jurisdiction. And it's equally important because our work, you are the example of that our work pursuing justice for victims and survivors of this war will last for years and maybe decades after this war will be ended by our victory, because our fight will take time. As my colleague, acting federal prosecutor of Germany, mentioned last week, our work is not sprint, rather marathon. But our aim and our joint commitment is to make this marathon not lasting for decades, but lasting for years. My dear colleagues, I will address the issue of the accountability by first looking into the damage caused to Ukrainian cultural heritage and then discussing the avenues of the accountability. For past decade, we have witnessed destruction of Ukrainian heritage on a scale never seen after or since Second World War. The ongoing war makes it impossible to fully assess the damage to cultural heritage along with the front lines and in occupied regions. However, existing data and preliminary understanding of the scale and nature of crimes is already devastating. Cultural heritage in eastern Ukraine has suffered the most from shelling. Museums, libraries, archives, along with stored exhibits, as well as archaeological sites, have been affected by targeted or indiscriminate shelling, as well as other destructive or hostile acts. Historic sites affected include, among many others, the UNESCO-listed Vasil Tarnovsky Museum of Ukrainian Antiquities and the Bural Mound at Boldyny Hory, one of the largest 11th century Ukrainian necropolises. Up to now, we have verified damage and destruction of 933 cultural sites. In none of these cases, attacks or destruction could be justified by military necessity. Once again, in none of these cases, there was no military necessity. The other types of violations are instances of looting of artifacts, paintings, books, coins, icons, jewelry, and other objects. We have established removal of tens of thousands of movable cultural property following the examination of the deoccupied territories of Ukraine. We also have unfortunate cases of illicit trafficking of Ukrainian cultural property by Russia's armed forces and their proxies, as discussed during the previous panel. We all know that the cultural ties are a significant aspect of Russia's warfare. These ties have been at the heart of Kremlin rhetoric as a justification for its aggression and attacks. It means that Russia's conduct needs to be examined in context of its persecutory policy against Ukrainian nation through the concerted actions aimed at erasing public history and our identity. I will give you a few examples how Russia attempts to achieve these objectives. Destruction of Ukrainian cultural monuments, their appropriation and looting. At first glance, it has a purely material manifestation, but in general historical perspective, it is a powerful, often irrecoverable blow to the origins of national memory. Removal and wiping out of Ukrainian archives. It opened doors for modifying and rewriting of the history. looting and illicit trafficking of valuable Ukrainian artifacts. It is a way to strip Ukrainian nation of its past and ancestry. And while in case of looted, seized or stolen movable cultural objects, we will try to return them through various ways, including restitution, the reconstruction of the lost physical fabric of damaged and destruction of cultural property is a challenging and intricate process. And unfortunately, it's not always possible. Now let me move to the accountability dimension. This brings us to a discussion of what can and is being done at the accountability front on national and international level. The first and main international agreement dealing exclusively with the protection of cultural heritage in case of war is 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict, and its two protocols. It has been adopted in response to the massive destruction of cultural heritage in Second World War. Rules are very clear. Safeguard cultural property in peacetime. Respect cultural property during armed conflict from attacks and destruction. Preserve cultural property in occupied territories. Undertake penal sanctions against persons breaching the convention. Likewise, attacks and destruction of cultural property is a war crime under Additional Protocol 1 of 1977. Ukraine is party to both of these treaties and open avenues for prosecution of war crimes committed against cultural property through the criminal legislation of Ukraine, Article 438 of the Criminal Code. We have opened investigation on central as well as regional level, namely, War Crimes Department is investigating 8 criminal cases on attacks and destruction against cultural property. In parallel, we have also 52 criminal proceedings in 10 regional offices of prosecutors. We are particularly focused on diversification and of the evidentiary sources, use of technology and OSINT, including the assessment of damage done and gathering of the testimonial evidence, encouraging and facilitating quality of documentation from various sources regarding the damage and destruction of cultural property, adequate preservation of evidence, etc. Our priority is to focus on identification and prosecution of the senior level perpetrators, the Russian commanders. Therefore, we are working on building of the chain of military command responsible for such attacks and destruction. The international dimension of accountability is closely linked with our cooperation with our international justice, with the international justice mechanisms, notably the International Criminal Court, that can prosecute attacks, destruction, and pillage of cultural property as a war crime or as a crime against humanity. And today's very sincere and straightforward address of the prosecutor of the ICC, Karim Khan, who confirmed, we are ready to investigate, is a very strong message of the commitment of the ICC, especially in the sphere where ICC has already successful experience. And second, the UN Inquiry Commission that can document and legally appraise Russian actions as the violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. Lastly, there is a third dimension, bilateral cooperation with third states to effectively investigate illicit trafficking of Ukrainian cultural objects for their tracing and return. All these dimensions are our priorities. This is so since crimes against cultural property and heritage are special in nature. They are not victimless crimes. The hostile acts against cultural heritage not only damage and destroy physical properties of an object, their impact ripples out into the Ukrainian community, touching and affecting all of us as we mourn the lost history, memory, and parts of ourselves. And this should not be allowed.
culture and cultural diversity is a common heritage of humanity. It goes beyond one nation or region and should be protected, safeguarded, and affirmed for the benefit of present and future generation. We owe this to them, and I'm confident we will be able to attain this. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is the Minister of Justice of the Republic of Poland, His Excellency Adam Piotr Bodnar. He has been serving in that capacity since last year. Before that, immediately before that, he was a senator of the Republic of Poland. Prior to that, a law professor and dean in Poland. And before that, he served as Poland's ombudsman, making him the top state official responsible for safeguarding human rights, a position to which he was eminently qualified since for 10 years before that, he was a practicing human rights lawyer managing the legal department of Poland's leading NGO that was active both domestically and internationally in strategic litigation, advocacy, and monitoring. A privilege to be on the panel with you, sir. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this great presentation and for inviting me to participate in this panel. When you have presented me, it reminded me about different things I did in my life, because right now I serve as the Minister of Justice, Prosecutor General, and in this capacity I'm responsible for overseeing what is happening in Poland. But let me start by sharing some of my general thoughts concerning way forward in the context of what we are talking about. It seems to me, taking into account my experience as a lawyer who was dealing with strategic litigation, that it is this problem in which we are experiencing a little bit something new. And this conference, and thank you, Andrei, for organizing this, is obviously organized in a very special time, in very special circumstances. But at the same time, we are developing new strategies of action, and we are thinking how to use different international and domestic instruments in order to fight against impunity, in order to fight and to hold perpetrators accountable for war crimes. And I think that when we are thinking about this from the point of view of not only accountability, but also from the point of view of, let's say, extending the use of different international instruments, sometimes what is important is finding, 1, 2, 3, 4 cases that are examples of some basic abuses in order to proceed with them in different courts, in order to show applicability of the existing legal instruments. And I think that for me this panel is really inspirational in terms of thinking these terms. So not only that we may bring to justice just everybody, but only in terms of extending the operational use of different instruments that are in our hands. Look at the ICC. Even ICC is not able to prosecute all existing war crimes. But if we start thinking this way, that if some cases are documented well, if some cases, with respect to some cases, we gather enough of evidence, then we'll be able to proceed more quickly with establishing accountability for some particular war crimes concerning the war crimes against the cultural heritage, and as a consequence, we are able to extend the operation and applicability of international criminal law norms. And in this regard, it would help not only Ukraine, but also other countries that may suffer because of similar things. For me, this panel is important because, as I said, I am responsible for domestic litigation, and Polish Prosecution Office has started official investigation concerning the war on aggression just immediately after the outbreak of the war, just a couple of days after. This investigation is important because, first of all, we have provisions in the criminal code that allow for conducting that kind of investigations because these are so-called crimes against peace. But interestingly, in the Polish Criminal Code, we may find provisions concerning the threat to the cultural heritage. It is Article 125 of the Polish Criminal Code, which provides that that if there is a violation of as a result of armed hostilities of a property of significant value or property of particular cultural significance, the offender might be liable to imprisonment from between 3 and 20 years. Moreover, it is possible to conduct that kind of investigation because of the presence of victims, witnesses on the Polish soil, and because it is not just a violation of Polish interest, but in general interest of humanity, of humankind, in the context of the war on aggression, and in the context of the aggression, and in the context of the destruction of the cultural heritage. And in this context, I would like to say that Polish prosecutors are actively participating in investigation of those crimes. Why? Because we have more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees resident in Poland, and basically it is we are in the same position as other countries of Europe to which people from Ukraine fled, and access to witnesses, victims, give us a possibility to collect evidence concerning also destruction of cultural heritage. Polish prosecutors, as of now, have collected evidence from 2,000 witnesses, and the question is whether it is enough, whether it is not. In my opinion, it would never be enough, and for me, this conference is an inspiration to double the effort, to be much more active. But also, I think what should be in our perspective is whether, in terms of collecting evidence concerning war crimes, we are concentrating just on all different war crimes, and whether we identify the special category of the war crimes against the cultural heritage. So for sure, after this conference, you know, if I see in the question the way forward, for me, one of the ideas would be to make instructions to Polish prosecutors that if you are conducting that kind of collection of evidence, you should be concentrated more on checking that kind of information and collecting this information, and especially what may be here interesting is the audiovisual materials that could be collected by them. So, in my opinion, those internal instructions within any prosecution service could be useful in terms of securing this evidence that, with the lapse of time, may simply evaporate, may be lost in time, and later on it could not be used. And please look that our signing of today's joint investigation team extension agreement, as well as this cooperation at the international level, also in the cooperation with Eurojust, but also in the context of IPCA, is giving us a chance that later on that kind of evidence could be used before ICC, maybe, let's hope, before the International Court for the crime of aggression, but also, and I hope for this, in the context of different procedural cases taken, because I can imagine a situation that some of those perpetrators may one day end up in Poland, or maybe may end up in a country which is subject of some extradition agreement with Poland, and maybe we'll be able to prosecute them on the basis of this evidence. Unfortunately, Poland is not having universal jurisdiction in a sense, or rather, I would say Polish law does not provide for the trial in absentia. But maybe, you know, that is also the cause for me to think to what extent we should move forward with extending the operation of the Polish law in this regard. It is one of those ideas I bring with me back home. So So I think that collecting evidence, concentrating on this specific aspect of evidence, thinking strategically about some potential cases, raising awareness about those cases and their importance for the general understanding what kind of consequences the war causes, is something that I would like to bring back home and continue my work as the Prosecutor General. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Your reference to the JIT and the fact of the historic signing of the JIT extension here in Kyiv this afternoon reminds me of the extraordinarily important work that the JIT does, and in turn reminds me of the great initiative that Ladislav Hamran and his colleagues at Eurojust took in driving for the creation of the JIT. At the Department of Justice, we negotiated with the Prosecutor General's, I'm sorry, with the JIT, a memorandum of understanding which the various justice ministers, including Attorney General Garland, signed at the Lviv conference in March of last year, another historic moment. Our next speaker is the Deputy Minister of Justice of Ukraine, Irina Mudra. She has been serving in that important position since 2022. Prior to that, she held a number of very senior positions in Ukraine's banking sector, dealing with compliance management, debt recovery, and other complex matters. Privilege to have you on the panel as well. Madam Deputy Minister, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Eli. Dear colleagues, guests, participants, it's an honor for me to be here and to speak before you. Starting since the Russian invasion against Ukraine, Russia has caused tremendous consequences to our country, to our people, to our cultural heritage. And Prosecutor General Mr. Kostin just mentioned a few numbers of the important cultural objects which have been destroyed and damaged by Russians. More than 900 objects of cultural heritage and around 2,000 objects of cultural infrastructure have been damaged and destroyed. But this pattern of Russia's conduct, it does not begin since 2022. It begins since 2014 at least. Since 2014, Russia has inflicted severe damage with large-scale theft and looting of cultural property on the territory of Ukraine. In Crimea and Sevastopol alone, the occupants have stolen more than 1.2 million objects of cultural property prior to the full-scale invasion. As of December 31, 2023, according to third rapid damage and needs assessment, executed by international organizations in cooperation with Ukraine, the total damage caused to Ukrainian cultural heritage and cultural object is estimated at $2.85 billion. And this number will definitely be much bigger. Among the most outrageous Russia's attacks on Ukrainian heritage were the missile strikes on the objects of cultural heritage of the great importance to humanity: World Heritage Property Historic Center of Odessa, National Grigory Skovoroda Museum, Ivankin Historical and Local History Museum, and Karazin National University in Kharkiv. Intentional targeting of cultural and religious sites that are not military targets is strictly prohibited by international humanitarian and criminal law. The parties engaged in warfare have the obligation not to direct hostilities against cultural property and must refrain from inflicting damages to such property. Using cultural property for military objectives is prohibited. Occupying powers must protect cultural property under their control from theft, misappropriation, and pillage. International law also prohibits the destruction of cultural property as a means of intimidating people under occupation and as a reprisal. Moreover, the occupying powers must prevent the exportation from a territory occupied by it during warfare of cultural property. Russia cynically disregards these erga omnes norms. I want to quote the preamble of the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. Any damage to cultural property, irrespective of people to whom it belongs, it is a damage to the cultural heritage of all humanity, because every people contributes to the world's culture. Thus, intentional attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, or charitable purposes, historic monuments, is a war crime, as acknowledged by the United Nations Security Council and Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Understanding perfectly well the importance of cultural heritage and values to preserve national identity, Russian destruction of cultural assets and heritage in Ukraine is an element of a wider pattern of deliberate attacks on Ukraine's identity, history, and memory, and it is within a systematic Russian genocidal campaign aimed at erasing Ukraine's cultural identity and destroying Ukrainians as a nation. Given the magnitude of the Russian assault on the Ukrainian nation, preservation of Ukraine's cultural heritage requires joint efforts of the international community, as well as prompt and effective mechanism punishment for the international crimes committed by the aggressor state and its agents. The International Criminal Court has the jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute war crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine. That is why Ukraine welcomes the willingness and statement of ICC prosecutor Karim Khan on readiness to prosecute war crimes related to international attacks against Ukraine's cultural objects, in addition to our national law enforcement bodies and courts. All perpetrators of such attacks must be brought to justice. Mr. Kostin said that rules on prohibition to destroy cultural heritage are very clear. Does Russia care to follow these rules? The answer is obvious, no. So what are the legal avenues to bring Russia to accountability and to claim from Russia the compensation for the damage caused to cultural heritage available? Are there any available legal forums? The answer is no. No court where Ukraine can apply to in order to appeal for, to claim the compensation from Russian Federation for the damages caused to cultural heritage. But the Russian Federation as a state must bear material responsibility because it's committed an international wrongful act. It has the international obligation to make reparation. And this obligation is not only to Ukraine. This obligation Russia owes erga omnes, meaning to the whole world global community. That's why the states have to cooperate in order to induce Russia to fulfill its obligation, its international obligation. That is why Ukraine, together with its international partners, works on creation of an international compensation mechanism. international compensation mechanism, which is envisaged by the resolution of General Assembly of United Nations as of 14th of November 2022, it envisages the creation of a compensation claims commission, the register of damage as the first step towards the creation of the compensation mechanism. The second step and the second component is the claims commission, and the third is compensation fund. So what in practice is the compensation mechanism? As I said, the International Register of Damage was created in 2023 by 43 states and European Union as an international organization. It was created by enlarged partial agreement concluded with the Council of Europe, and this register is placed in The Hague, the Netherlands. The register is the database for collecting all the information and evidences on all kinds of damages, loss and injury caused to Ukraine, to Ukrainians, and to legal entities, both private and public, on the territory of Ukraine, starting since 24th of February 2022. So, in other words, this register will be a catalog of the outstanding debt of Russia with regards to damages caused due to this full-fledged invasion. But the register will remain meaningless if there will be no tool for executing the claims, awarding the claims on compensation. That is why the integral component of the compensation mechanism is Claims Commission. And Claims Commission will be able and will have mandate and jurisdiction to determine the amounts of the damage and to award these amounts based on the application from the victims and from the state, because the state is also a victim. But again, the Claims Commission will be meaningless if we do not find the way how to pay out the decisions of the Claims Commission. That is why the third component, and one of the most important one, is the compensation fund. And Ukraine struggles that this fund is financed primarily by means of Russian sovereign assets, because it is Russia who committed war crimes, who committed atrocities, who committed international wrongful act. That is why it's Russia who should pay for it. And if Russia does not do it voluntarily, and it will not do it, then there should be a tool, a mechanism conveyed by the states to induce Russia to fulfill this obligation. And this mechanism can be addressed through getting access to Russian sovereign assets on which we are working together with our partners. The Register of Damage will definitely have the information on all damage and losses caused to cultural property, to cultural heritage, cultural objects, and the government of Ukraine approved the proposal of the categories of claims which will be included into the register on the 1st of December 2023 and provided this proposal to the register. Now the board of the register, which was just recently composed, have to approve these categories, have to approve the rules and procedures of the register, and we expect that the register will start functioning the beginning of April. There is, due to the fact that there is no available legal for Ukraine together with partners, will create an administrative fact-finding claims commission, which will be able to determine the amount of damages caused to Ukrainian cultural heritage, and will pursue all means, all legal means by which Russia will be forced to pay the compensation for these damages. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Minister. Our next speaker, right next to me here, is Maria Mezentseva. She is a member of Ukraine's parliament, chairperson of the Ukrainian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe as well. She is deputy chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Ukraine's integration into the European Union, obviously doing a lot of very essential work. And again, a privilege to be joining you up here on the panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Ellie. Privileged to have you here with us in person at the capital of freedom and democracy. Dear Prosecutor General, big honor to be invited here and to represent Ukrainian Parliament. You know, I've met one lady in the corridor and she was questioning why the Parliament is actually here, because it's usually an executive branch. But I'll try to briefly drag you back into the history of how it all began back in February 2022, relying on already achievements which have been committed together with the help of our international partners, Prosecutor's Office, and of course the Ministry of Justice. But the real heroes, friends, are those who are on the field recording every war crime. These are the National Police and Prosecutor's Office General in every region who are operating daily basis with the title on their backs, war crime prosecutors. And I would like to mention that it's due to them and to the prosecutor's office that the data we present internationally wide, whether that would be linked to critical infrastructure destructions or blockhouses of the people in my home city in Kharkiv, for instance, or the cultural heritage. This is the most documented war in the history of humanity. We have digitalized so many pieces of evidence that would be very easy to proceed in the courts because this evidence is ready. More than 122,000 war crimes is registered, and this piece behind you from very famous artist Marina Primachenko, it's not the actual piece of art, unfortunately, but the digital picture on the ruined pieces of the museum, which is from the modern history of war, which you can visit in Kiev, is yet another evidence that Russian war of aggression is targeting our identity and historical heritage. And these are the new notions which are arising in international legal system. And we're talking about the denial of identity. I'm referring to the words of Putin. He is denying the existence of Ukrainian nation, and of course the cultural erasure. What do we do and what have we done in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, where in March 2022 we expelled Russia? Immediately in that document we suggested the impossible. We suggested to establish the International Court for the Crime of Aggression, because this is the core evil which led and brought us to numerous numbers of war crimes. And yet today already we have an office operating in The Hague collecting the evidences. The whole world has heard the speech. The aggression occurred in 2014. I will tell you more. We are addressed by the colleagues from Moldova, from Georgia, from other countries that Russia has invaded to enlarge the geography. But let's focus on Ukraine for now. Furthermore, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is investigating the core essence of a trial to erase our identity. Already in April, we will vote on yet another resolution focusing on countering the erasure of cultural identity in war and peace. And here we talk about tangible and intangible losses, because something we're losing today, like above mentioned, a museum by Madame Mudra from my home region, Kharkiv, the famous philosopher Grigory Skovoroda, who spoke at least 18 foreign languages. It was in the middle of nowhere, friends. It was not needed to target it in the middle of nowhere, which proves they targeted it on purpose to erase our cultural identity. Thank God, with the help of UNESCO, we fundraised $66 million to do this or other possible events to preserve cultural heritage. But does this cover the possible estimate from 14th of February current year, it's estimated 3.5 billion losses. I think they would grow higher and higher daily. Therefore, as Madam Mudra referred to the register of damage and of course the whole catalog of the war crimes, but most importantly, the compensation which every Ukrainian family can apply for starting from April, hopefully, current year, but it's also extremely important to review every war crime linked to the cultural heritage in reference to the compensation. So this is yet another initiative of the members, of the deputies of 46 member states. We have done impossible. Here on the ribbon we have also as a partner the Council of Europe, which celebrates this year's 75th anniversary of activities. And friends, when we were in Reykjavik May last year, and we were sitting in front of the signature of this multi-partial agreement, which is open for everyone, and notably all G7 member states have also signed it, so it's a global document calling for compensations. I did not believe that we have made it possible. So the art diplomacy is currently doing impossible very possible. I would like also to focus on the technologies in our future resolutions, which we will also pass in April this year. We will have a resolution concretely focusing on what will be the resources, where we will get the money from. It is not Poland, it is not Lithuania, it's not Portugal, it's not Japan, it's not US and other partners, the taxpayers' funds of whom we should use for the compensations. We surely focus on the fact that this is Russian Federation who has to pay for all these crimes. We have the frozen assets of the central bank. We have extremely good case of the Kingdom of Belgium passing the ministry already 1.3 billion euros from the assets that it's holding and the percentage that is growing. Well, growing, it's stable, but the funds are growing monthly basis. And we think it will go further. So, dear friends, it's about courage. It's about the fact that while destroying the largest square of freedom in my home city, Kharkiv, my university, the University of Karazin, my office in the city center, and many, many other memories linked personally to me, but many more millions Ukrainians globally, and we're around 60 million people globally, I think we definitely have to focus still on bravery and to thank our partners to be brave as we are, and definitely justice is relaunched thanks to such people as Prosecutor Kosting, his counterparts globally, and of course let's not underestimate what the parliaments are doing today, and we hope that we will pass the piece of legislation in US, further on Bundestag, but it was already supported worldwide. Last but not least, friends, Russia can still launch rockets. We work on air defense to protect civilian, of course, our critical and cultural heritage, but they cannot destroy freedom and bravery. So the commitment is there. This widely wide audience today at the conference proves that, and I hope everyone who's looking at us and watching us online can do their part, at least tweet and put their pieces on Facebook, how important today it is to protect cultural heritage. So we are united for justice and united for cultural heritage. Thank you, friends.
Bravo. Thank you. Our next speaker, joining us remotely, is my longtime friend, Ambassador Clint Williamson, who was previously had many important positions in the U.S. government. We worked together when you were the ambassador for war crimes issues, but Clint has always also been a trial attorney at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. He had served for 3.5 years at the White House, at the National Security Council, many other important positions, and currently he serves as lead coordinator for the ACA, the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, created by the United States, the EU, and the United Kingdom, specifically and solely to deal with accountability for crimes committed against Ukraine. The ACA does enormously important work. When I was at Justice, we partnered with them on a variety of projects, and it's a nice opportunity for me to express publicly what I have said privately to you, Clint, which is that we are abidingly grateful for that partnership and for all the help you gave us. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eli. As Eli said, we've worked together for many years, probably more years than we would like to admit. And it's great to see you in this role after your retirement. We're counting on you to stay engaged. So glad to see you in Kyiv hosting this event. I'm sorry I cannot be there today, not least because it's quite uncomfortable to loom over the proceedings with this larger-than-life image on the big screen. But I will be back in Kyiv in a little over a week. I just want to thank the Office of the Prosecutor General, my good friend Andrei Kostin, for hosting the event today, and our partners in the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group who have supported this event, particularly Bravo Justice and the EU Advisory Mission. And I'm very pleased that Georgetown University, with which I'm affiliated, was also able to help support this. What I wanted to speak about briefly this morning is my experience at the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. And the destruction of cultural property featured very prominently at ICTY. And I think some of the lessons that were learned there are applicable to the situation in Ukraine. We're certainly drawing on them in our work through ACA. And I think it would just be useful to maybe talk a little bit about this history. In particular, I want to talk about two cases that I personally worked on where destruction of cultural property was a significant factor. The first of these was in Vukovar. For those who don't know about Vukovar, it was a large town in the eastern part of Croatia on the border with Serbia, on the Danube River. It was subjected to a siege by Serbian forces for 3 months in autumn of 1991. And during the course of this siege, Vukovar was almost entirely destroyed. The same tactics were used in Vukovar as in Mariupol. And it was drawing on this Russian school of thought for military usage, which just gives absolutely no regard to the impact on civilians. It was destroy the town and then send in ground troops who committed terrible atrocities once they entered into the city. It was about 2,500 people were killed in Vukovar, and it was the site of the first large-scale mass killing in all of the wars in the former Yugoslavia, when 250 men and boys were taken out of a hospital in Vukovar and murdered and dumped in a mass grave. But during the course of our investigation on Vukovar, which I led, we looked very closely at attacks on cultural heritage sites in the city. And there were several, including the Eltz Museum, which was Eltz Castle, which served as a museum for Vukovar, an art gallery, very important historical building, many churches, other buildings there. We looked at how these buildings were all destroyed during the course of the Serbian attacks and invasion. And eventually, though, decided that we could not charge these cases for a variety of reasons. Number one, it was very difficult to substantiate the circumstances on the ground during the siege. Remember, this is 1991. No one had smartphones. There was very limited satellite imagery. The type of resources that we rely on today simply just did not exist in 1991. There were virtually no outside observers in the town, and none by the time that it was finally occupied by Serbian forces. So no objective witnesses who could testify as to what they were seeing. Just with the barrage of attacks, it was also very difficult to determine where the Croats had placed military assets, and whether by putting snipers or artillery pieces or whatever, they were making some of these legitimate targets. Also, the fact is that many of these sites were isolated. They were not part of a sort of a conglomerate of cultural sites. And so the areas surrounding them were entirely destroyed as well. So it was very difficult to determine if these sites were targeted in particular. So at the end of the day, we did not charge destruction of cultural property in Vukovar. The other case, though, that I also led and conducted the investigation and then ultimately drafted the indictment was for the siege and attacks on the city of Dubrovnik. And this was a very different situation. We also saw indiscriminate shelling. We saw the same tactics employed against Dubrovnik as Vukovar. Although in the end, Dubrovnik held out. It was not occupied by Serbian forces. They were not victorious there, but they surrounded the city and subjected it to terrible shelling. In particular, there were targeted attacks against the old town of Dubrovnik, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in its entirety. There were lots of outside observers in Dubrovnik. The European Community Monitoring Mission had observers on the ground. UNESCO had observers on the ground. There were a number of journalists that were there. So these were all witnesses who could provide objective testimony as to what they were saying. They could substantiate the fact that Croatia had not placed military assets in or near cultural heritage sites. And there was a tremendous amount of news footage which documented what was happening. Even on Serbian television, they had these triumphant reports that they were showing, much like what we've seen on Russian television, of attacks that were taking place from high ground on this mountain called Žarkovica outside of Dubrovnik, where they were using wire-guided missiles to fire directly at sites in the old town, including the dome of the cathedral. So we charge this as violations of the laws or customs of war. Unjustified destruction or unlawful attacks on civilian objects, destruction of willful damage to historic monuments and institutions dedicated to religion. This crime was explicitly provided for in the ICTY statute, the first time since the amendments in 1954 in international law. But this was the first case ever brought in an international tribunal specifically for destruction of cultural property. Beyond being charged explicitly in the Dubrovnik case, destruction of cultural property was also incorporated in several cases where the crime of persecution was charged as a crime against humanity, where attacks were made on churches, other religious institutions, cultural heritage sites. And so this was included and made part of those cases, although it was not charged explicitly as it was under the violations of laws or customs of war in Dubrovnik. And then finally, in the Tolomir case, there was very, very solid language that came out in the judgment that related to the link between destruction of cultural property and the crime of genocide. As you all may remember, Raphael Lemkin had suggested destruction of cultural property, cultural genocide, be included in the genocide convention. It was not, ultimately. But what the ICTY held in the Tolomir case was that although an attack on cultural or religious property or symbols of a group would not constitute a genocidal act, such an attack may nevertheless be considered evidence of an intent to physically destroy the group. So I think as we approach these cases in Ukraine, we can draw on these lessons from ICTY. We can see how this destruction of cultural property fits into this whole broader approach for accountability that we are pursuing there, under war crimes, under crimes against humanity, under genocide. And I think it's in our interest to pursue all of these various avenues and make sure that those who are responsible for these crimes in Russia are held to account. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clint, Mr. Ambassador. Our final speaker is Tural Mustafayev, Program Representative for Cultural and Emergencies at UNESCO's Cultural Sector in Paris, France. Before that, he held a position as Director of Research and Education at the NATO International School of Azerbaijan. And he also worked in the Department of International Law and Treaties of the Azerbaijani Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Great to have you up here, Tural, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you, General Prosecutor, and I would like to extend the appreciation of my organization, the UNESCO, for inviting us today, and extend our gratitude to all of your team that put together such an important event. This event comes also in a very interesting time when we are marking the 70th anniversary of the 1954 Hague Convention. The convention that was adopted in the wake of the Second World War, exactly for the reasons for preventing the wanton destruction of cultural heritage. But yet, we witness in the center of Europe one of the unprecedented damages to cultural heritage, both in the form of tangible and its intangible form. So it's important to have this event and exchange and discuss what we can do on way forward. At the outset, let me say that UNESCO, we do not have a mandate to investigate, nor we collect the forensic evidence. But our actions and activities that we do in Ukraine and across the world has been very useful for different purposes. The data that we collect by conducting our activities is very detailed, and I will speak about that in the course of my presentation. So in Ukraine, in the field of culture, we are operating in the 6 fields. The first is damage assessment, and the second is a capacity building that I will touch on this too, which is important for the purposes of this conference. And then we are also supporting the recovery and the reconstruction of the sites that has been damaged as a result of the war. We are supporting artists who has been impacted severely due to the war. We are supporting communities through the culture that has been displaced. We are supporting the government for digital transformation in their efforts. But among those 6, the 2 are more important. The damage assessment. We have started the damage assessment on 24th of February, exact the day when the full-scale invasion has been launched by the Russian Federation. We have seen, before me, a couple of the experts has already shared the data that we have published. As of today, we have marked around more than 340 sites, which is not an exhaustive list, which is probably the tip of the iceberg. But our experts work on daily basis. They are analyzing each report of incident published in the media, in social media, in mass media. And information that we are receiving from our national and international partners. They are checking the images before damage and after damage, and we are working with the UN Satellite Agency to mark every single damage on satellite through the satellite images to understand the scale of the damage. So we have, as of today, as I said, we have been able to verify over 340 sites, and the financial damage figures has been already shared. They are for the only sites that we have marked as damaged, they are over 600 million, but this requires a more on-site verification. We don't do only the remote assessment, but in multiple cities we have went to the sites. We have done on-site damage assessment. When the attacks in Odessa happened in July of 2023, the Director General of UNESCO has dispatched the rapid mission to Odessa, which is a World Heritage Site. And our experts has verified and collected the data from over 50 cultural sites that has been damaged in the course of a couple days as a result of the shelling launched by the Russian Federation. So that all this data we are compiling and we are ready to share with the government of Ukraine whenever is needed. But as a way forward, I think we need more coordinated efforts to see how we can merge our data and work on this damage assessment together, because that will be important not only for investigation purposes, but also for recovery of the cultural sites following the end of the war. The second area which is important is the implementation of the 1954 Hague Convention and its two protocols. Ukraine became a party to the second protocol in 2020. And in fact, in 22nd of February of 2022, just 2 days before the war, we were having a meeting with the Ukrainian government, including with the members of the Office of the Prosecutor General, to discuss how we can better coordinate to reinforce the implementation of this convention and protocols in the country. But unfortunately, as a result of the war, we have suspended the discussion, but we have recently resumed it, so we'll be happy to discuss further how we can work on the capacity building. We have already done activities for trainings in Poland for several neighboring countries on illicit trafficking, to make sure that bordering countries has an information about about artifacts that has been illegally removed from the Ukrainian cultural sites. We will do more. At the moment, we are doing in Lviv the workshops for the museum directors. We are training on the digitization of the artifacts, on their inventories, to prevent any future damage to the cultural sites. So this is another area that I guess for coming months we need to scale up and work together. And at the end, I would like to just refer to the statement of the former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda, when she said in her opening remarks of the case of Al-Mahdi, which was the first the case brought in the International Criminal Court against an individual for war crimes against cultural property. And she said that the fact that the crime against cultural property is so profound is because it's a crime against an identity and memory of a nation, and it's a crime against the entire population's future. So I hope the events like this and the cooperation will scale up. We will be able to find ways to end the impunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tural, for enlightening us and for the extraordinarily important, essential work that UNESCO does in this area, in all areas, in so many areas. We have time for a few questions, so I thought I will take the prerogative of asking first couple. So one for Irina Mudra. You spoke of the importance of trying to seize Russia's sovereign assets abroad, but you also mentioned that the likely value of the damages caused by Russia total in the trillions. Do you think that there is enough value in their sovereign assets abroad to cover all the damage that they've caused? And if not, what other methodologies might exist, what other strategies might exist for pursuing further compensation?
Thank you for the question. Very interesting. Definitely, there is not enough sovereign assets in the jurisdictions of our partners, I would say, to cover all the damages caused to Ukraine and Ukrainians. According to the recent assessment done by World Bank and international organizations together with Ukraine, the amount of damages caused to Ukraine as a state, we do not speak here about the compensation to private individuals, to victims, is estimated at the value of $486 billion. And we can easily double this figure if we take into account the damages to individuals and to businesses. That is why those up to $300 billion of Russian reserves, this is under discussion nowadays, will cover half of the amount of the damages. But this is a huge amount in any case. So we definitely have to struggle for the access to these Russian sovereign assets. And with regards who should cover the whole damage, definitely Russia. How we will induce it to do this? Well, there are different ways. For example, if you take the example of Iraq-Kuwait Claims Commission, there was a decision which is not available in our case of Security Council to create a compensation fund which was supposed to be filled in with proceeds from oil and oil transactions conducted by Iraq. It might be the option in our case for sure. And in the end of the day, when the political leadership change in Russia, there will be a discussion because Russia will definitely need to be back to the civilized world, needs to be back to the financial markets, global financial markets. They will have to negotiate the outstanding debt of Russia. So Russia can be the party to the compensation mechanism which we are trying to create with international partners. It will be up to Russia to be a party and to agree on the sources for paying out the decisions of the Claims Commission. But we have no options now. We have to start even from this figure, $260, $300 billion to get access to it. Of course, it will take years to adjudicate these claims and provide compensation. So who knows, in future, maybe Russia will agree to become a participant. If not, that we will have to find other ways and other sources for financing the compensation fund.
Thank you. Very helpful. A question for Prosecutor General Kostin. Assembling the information on damages caused by Russian forces for the Register of Damage, for instance, is a massive undertaking. Especially during wartime. Is there a role for Ukraine's many friends abroad, NGOs, foreign governments, international organizations, to play in a role to play in helping move that process along?
Thank you, Eli. Of course, and this is one of the aims of this conference, and we are supported by our friends and allies here in person. Not all of them, of course, only the part, but our closest friends and allies who are with us. Of course, it's important because, first of all, we are talking about the intent, and many of speakers today were talking about intent. And the intent to erase Ukrainian identity, even trying to steal our history, our past. I think it's very strong signal to many of those in the civilized world, not only who support us, but for those who maybe still are not ready to find on which side of history they want to stay. And finding these new arguments with evidences, and this is very important to extend not only support of Ukraine as a country, as a nation, and our people, but also to explain to those who are still saying that they are too far from the front line, that front line is close, and front line is not only how to say, initiated by Russia. So this front line is spreading throughout the world, and it could appear in different places. And everyone should be ready for not only to address these risks, but also probably to take decisions timely in order to supply Ukraine with full resources to win in both on the battlefield and in the courtrooms. And of course, the issue of engagement of NGOs, Ukrainian NGOs and international NGOs. You mentioned international element of our support is also important, not only in telling the truth, so what we are highlighting today, and adding these type of crimes to all other variety of war crimes committed on massive scale, but also to reach the governments and to help to collect evidences, because we definitely know that Ukrainian refugees who are located now in different places, yes, Poland, Germany, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, many other countries, they have they have known something, and they could be witnesses and victims of different war crimes, and they could be witnesses of destruction and looting of the cultural objects. And their evidences are also extremely important, not only for our investigations, but also for the potential investigations on the level of International Criminal Court or in our partner state jurisdictions, starting from completely purely universal like Germany or our friends from Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, and Romania. So I think that there is a lot of work which could be done. And one of the also the goals of such events and of our meetings is to coordinate these efforts, because we don't want anyone who help us to be demotivated, because when they do something, they need to see response. It should be response, some response. But in order not to overlap, in order not to lose, so there are two differences. So evidences could be lost because the witness will not come and will not provide statements or photo or video or something they have. Or the other side, which they, in other case, when they provide with something and then they see that there is no response, and I don't want them to lose hope. And of course, this is a very difficult work to coordinate all these efforts. But these meetings and this constant communication is aimed also in order to coordinate our efforts, not to lose anything, and to help everyone who is ready to help us.
Thank you. Excellent points, of course. Picking up on one thing that you said, I don't recall that in the typical interviews, sort of intake interviews that are done of Ukrainian refugees in other countries by NGOs and others, that there are kind of prefabricated questions that ask about looting of cultural properties. And if my recollection is accurate, maybe consideration can be given to adding those to the standard questions. My last question, well, we're almost, I think we're out of time, but let me try for a quick answer. One of the slides that was projected this afternoon referenced the strategy of isolating the aggressor. And we've been seeing that done from the more or less symbolic, like as in Russia's exclusion from this summer's Olympic Games in Paris, to more substantive, Russia's being kicked off the Human Rights Council, to potentially even more serious isolation measures like the one that I personally favor, which is at least beginning the conversation about expelling Russia from the Security Council of the United Nations. There's precedent for it. They don't have a legal right to be on the Security Council anymore, since they are violating the UN Charter's most important provision, and they are in violation of the agreement pursuant to which they joined the Security Council, taking the seat formerly occupied by the former Soviet Union. But are there any analogs in the art world, in the World Heritage realm, from which Russia has not yet been excluded or isolated, that where that could usefully be done? I'm looking at Torel, who really lives in that realm. I don't know. Okay. As I used to say at work, that sounds like a law student project. We'll put someone on it. Thank you to all our wonderful panelists, to our patient audience. I think the fact that you all are here in such numbers, it's really standing room only, sends a message to Moscow, an important message, and it also sends a good message to the people of Ukraine, reminding them yet again that Ukraine does not stand alone, that there are many countries, many organizations, many people who stand with you, shoulder to shoulder, in your fight for freedom, for justice, for territorial integrity. God bless Ukraine. Slava Ukraine.